Hi, this is Steve Gladys at George Mason Enterprise Center for Steve Gladys Leadership Partners. We're talking about a new book called Positive Leadership, The Game Changer at Work. We did a little introduction and talked to you about three areas that we're going to be discussing in the book based on the research that we've aggregated. And the first one is get social with your networks and in your networks. All of us live in a network if we're lucky enough to be socially secure. We have a set of networks around us. If this is you, you should have family who surround you and you have loving relationships with those folks. You should have friends that support you. And then there's this thing called work. And at work there's sort of our three big rings we're going to talk about. That's your boss, your peers, and your direct reports. It's interesting to note, my first career was as an FBI agent many years ago. And when we studied people who did terrible deeds like mass murders and things like that, we actually found out that many of those people were completely isolated from folks. If you look at the shootings in Colorado and New Hope and places like that, many of those people were those young men, and usually it's young men, unfortunately, are completely isolated or isolated themselves. Those are the people who tend to become more disenfranchised and become more imbalanced. They lack that sort of social glue that keeps them together. And so we find out from the research that those people who tend to be happy, and happiness varies, by the way. Happiness varies, and Sonia Lyubomirsky has talked about this in her work. The variance, if you had an entire group of 100 people who were actually identical twins in a room, their happiness would vary based on a number of things. 50% of the variance would be just on their heredity, that we get 50% of that from our parents. But only 10% comes from all the things that happen to you in life. But fully 40% of the variance in a group of even identical twins, 40% of the variance is the kind of happiness that you control, the kind of positivity you control. I think this is an important number. I think it's an amazing number, to be sure. But there are also a couple of other numbers you want to be sure about. It's called Losada's line. Marcel Losada was the guy that studied relationships, and he basically found out that if you want positive relationships with people, you have to have about a 3-to-1 ratio. It's called the magic line. 3-to-1 relation, three positive to 1 negative, points the arrow up in a relationship. Only a 2-to-1, 2 positive, 1 negative, makes the arrow go flat. But a 1-to-1, which doesn't seem like too bad, actually points the relationship toward divorce or dissolution. The only other things I want to, and by the way, a guy named John Gottman says in a marriage you need 5-to-1. Now that's a little scary for most of us, 5-to-1 to point a marriage north. The other thing that I'd like to mention real briefly is that at work you need to have relationships not just with your boss, although that's probably the most important relationship you have in your life outside of your family. It's called the vertical couple by Dan Goleman. But you also need to have relationships with people who are your peers and people who are your direct reports. That 360 relationship makes for not only a positive but an incredibly productive relationship at work. Getting social in your networks at work and at home gives you the kind of resilience that you'll need to overcome some of the things that will come your way at work and in your life. Thanks very much. This is Steve Gladys at Steve Gladys Leadership Partners at George Mason University at the Mason Enterprise Center. Thank you.